This is episode 42 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and my guest tonight is making his debut appearance on the show. He's a contributor for HeavyHockey.com, Ryan Lotsberg. Ryan, how's it going tonight, man?
I'm doing well. How are you, Eric?
I'm really good. Yeah, of course. You've been on the Oilers Live podcast with Michael several times now, and I believe straight off the pipe with Dash and Durst as well. So I think it's about time I had you on my show.
Yeah, I've got to complete the heavy hockey trifecta here.
Yeah, exactly. We also did an episode together a couple of years ago, I believe, when you were still with Oil Drops.
Yeah, that's right. Talking about Tyler Benson, if I recall.
Yeah, it was just before the pandemic hit, I think, on Michael's show. So yeah, it's long overdue for us to record another episode.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah, of course. And we've got a lot to talk about tonight. But before we break down the Oilers' last game, I'd like to just hear a little bit about your own hockey background. So let me just start by asking you, how did you first get interested in hockey, and how did you become an Oilers fan?
Well, I first remember getting into hockey when I had to have been like 7 or 8 years old. I just remember being in trouble in my room one day and having the hockey game on when I wasn't supposed to be watching TV. It was an Oilers Jets game, if I recall. But growing up as a kid, to be honest, I was not an Oilers fan. I was into the Ducks for a little while because of the whole Disney thing, and I loved their colors, and I was a big Paul Kariya fan. And then once Colorado moved to Colorado in '96, then I hopped on that bandwagon and I cheered for them through their glory years.
Interesting. So then how did you eventually make the switch to cheering for the Oilers?
I'm going to be rubbing Oilers fans the wrong way here, but my Avalanche, they got 2 of my most hated players at the time, one of which was Darcy Tucker and the other was Ryan Smith.
Really?
I was never a Smitty fan. I always thought he was overrated.
Wow. So yeah, you put out a bit of a tease on Twitter today saying that your answer would be somewhat controversial, and there might be a large amount of Oilers fans who are going to disagree with you there, but that's interesting. So you switched to Edmonton shortly after he would have signed there in Colorado in 2007?
It was shortly after that, yeah. Like it was around the time, like I was just getting into the World Juniors then, and I started to see guys like Jordan Eberle be on our radar and our pipeline, and I was like, yes, that's the type of hockey I want. Like I was never a fan of the old workman-like crew that could never, that would at best fight for a 8th spot in the Western Conference kind of deal. Like I wanted to see some skill. And like Jordan Eberle getting drafted was kind of the start of that. And part of me was just being tired of sticking out like a sore thumb and opposing the home team all the time. And I just wanted to be part of the group. So I ended up popping on with the Oilers, and I've been a loyal fan ever since.
Yeah, that's interesting because anytime I have a first-time guest on, I always ask them how they became an Oilers fan. And it's interesting to talk to people of different ages, like someone in their 60s compared to someone who's 20 years old, and to hear, who their favorite players were growing up, who they idolized, how they became a fan of the team. But that is maybe the most interesting answer that I've heard on this show is your transition to becoming an Oilers fan after the Smitty years. And if you were a more fan of the skill than the grinded out style, I can see how you might have not been a fan of him, because that was 100% his game. And, as an Oilers fan through all those years in the late 90s and early 2000s, they simply just didn't have the financial backing to ice a championship level team. They were, a 6th, 7th, 8th place team that would kind of get in the playoffs just barely. And, one time beat Dallas in the first round, one time beat Colorado, but mostly it was a first round exit until after the salary cap came in 2005, when they were able to actually be on a competitive playing field with the rest of the league. But yeah, that's interesting. I was a big fan of Eberle too, and you're right, that did sort of signal a change that the Oilers were looking to acquire or build with more young skill, like obviously Eberle, Magnus Pajärvi in 2009, and then Taylor Hall in 2010. But yeah, it's obviously they weren't able to build the team around those guys they would have liked. But that's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard an answer like that.
Got to keep people on their toes.
Yeah, exactly. So you've lived in Edmonton your whole life then. Yeah, is that what you're saying? You were kind of surrounded and pressured by Oilers fans a bit?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I always got made fun of and teased in school just because I was always a Colorado fan for the longest time, and everyone else was an Oilers fan, obviously. But we always had good fun with it.
Yeah, and I mean during the early 2000s when the Avs were an elite team and competing for cups, you had bragging rights at least, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I always making friendly bets with my friends in the playoff series in the late '90s. There, so that was always fun.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Well, I'm glad you're on the good side now. And so I was going to ask who your favorite Oilers players were growing up, but since you were probably getting closer to being an adult by the time you made the switch to being an Oilers fan, I'll just ask then, who are your favorite Oilers players of all time?
Favorite Oilers players of all time. I mean, I'm a big fan of the current group. Honestly, like if you see my background in some of the Oilers live that podcast I've done, I've gotten like a shrine to Connor McDavid going in my apartment here. So I'm a huge fan of his. But if we want to go back to the older years, I guess like Ales Hemsky was always a favorite of mine. Like he was one of the more skilled Oilers of that era.
Me too.
And when I was a kid, I would have to say like Dougie Weight. He was certainly the most skilled player on those teams in the early 2000s. So he was fun to watch.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for the post-dynasty Oilers, Doug Weight was the best player that franchise had. And then there was a period of about 5 years where Ales Hemsky was the franchise player in Edmonton, or the face of the franchise, whatever you want to call it, until Taylor Hall basically came to town in 2010. But yeah, that's interesting. I obviously am a big fan of the current group too. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl. I mean, we're so spoiled to get to watch those two together in their prime. I think this is the closest that anyone from our generation could say to what the fans in the 80s had of watching, Gretzky and Messier together.
Oh, absolutely. We're just missing those Stanley Cup rings.
We just need a Paul Coffey, a Glenn Anderson, and a Yari Curry.
More importantly, a Grant Fuhr.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a good, because we're going to get to that later in the show. But in all seriousness, I do think that the Oilers have a pretty good core built. It's just a matter of getting the surrounding pieces to, become a championship caliber team.
Oh yeah, I'd agree with that. The core is there. Just need to do a little bit more shuffling, and we'll be there.
Exactly. And I was going to ask you what what you remember about your first Oilers game at Northlands Coliseum, but I'm guessing the first time you actually saw a game there, you might have been cheering for the Avs or the Ducks.
Absolutely. Yeah, my first game, it was Oilers Ducks, and I was cheering for the Ducks. And
do you remember anything about the game? What year? Anything like that?
That was too far back. I don't remember the exact year, but I do remember my first playoff game. That was the first round in 1998, Oilers Avs. I remember that vividly. 5-4 Colorado win in overtime. Joe Sakic streaking down the left wings, wins it with a slap shot in overtime, and I lost my mind. I remember walking into that game. I was wearing my Avalanche jersey, and we walked by a guy pregame, and he had a lighter in his hands. He kind of flicked it at me. And you got to remember, I was 10 years old at this time.
Wow.
10 or 11 years old, and this dude flicks his lighter at me and says, "Is that thing flammable?"
So the Avs had just won the Cup 2 years previous to that. You must have been shocked that they were upset by the Oilers in the first round.
Yeah, I was none too pleased. Yeah, no, it was definitely a surprise, beyond words.
Do you come from a hockey family? Is your family Oilers fans, or was there any influence of them trying to pressure you into cheering for the hometown team?
Honestly, no. Like my family has never really been that into hockey. Like I'm kind of the black sheep that way. Like
Okay.
my dad's always been like really into music. He's a musician by heart, so that's kind of in my blood.
Hmm.
And my mom, like her family watched a little bit of hockey when she was growing up, but yeah, like it just didn't stick with them for whatever reason. But I've since got my mom more into it. She cheers and watches some of the games sometimes. But yeah, my dad, he's more into music than sports.
Oh, that's cool. Do you play any instruments yourself?
I do. I play a little bit of guitar from time to time.
Okay.
Not as good as my dad, but I'll just play in my apartment for myself. So
He taught you a few chords?
yeah, it taught me some chords, taught me the basics.
Nice. Um, well, just to wrap up on talking about your own experiences as an Oilers fan, what is your best memory of watching the Oilers either on TV or live in person?
There's a lot of memories that jump out at me. Like there was a period where I was actually an usher at Rexall Place.
Oh, no way.
For a little bit. So like that was in the early part of the Hope years. It's like being there for Omar's shootout goal was pretty cool. That like the building was crazy that night. But I have to say the most memorable ones that I've been to were closing night at Rexall and then opening night at Rogers. Like I'm only likely going to see an arena open and close once in my lifetime.
Well, the Oilers have a 35-year lease on Rogers Place, which means they're slated to play there until 2051. So, if they open a new building, then you'll probably, hopefully you're still around to see that one. I'll be 62 then, so I'm hoping I get to see another
I
new
can't
barn
do
event.
that quickly. I'm hoping I'm still around too, but yeah.
Exactly. You don't want to be like the Flames and playing in their old barn for another 10 years longer than they have to.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be the best.
No. Do you try to get out to a few games a year? Like, how often do you go see a game at Rogers Place?
I try to get to a handful or so every year. I'm actually I'm going tomorrow night too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I remember the year that Rogers opened. I must have gone to something like 15 to 20. I can't remember the exact number. And like, I'm not a season seat holder at all.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept getting invited to games and I bought games. This year, I'll probably end up at 7 or 8 by the time I'm done.
That's a pretty good total. And I mean, hopefully you get to see the Oilers win on Hockey Night in Canada against the defending champs tomorrow night. I'll be there on the 28th to see them play the Coyotes. And
Nice.
I'm hoping that that's going to be I don't want to say an easy win, but a game that they should win, although the Coyotes have been playing a lot better as of late. Let's hope that it's just a brief hot stretch here and that we'll get to see McDavid and Draisaitl have some big point nights and lead the Oilers to victory when I come to town in a couple weeks. Well, anyway,
Nick Schmaltz stops doing his McDavid impression.
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to see a 7-point night from Connor when they roll into town.
Absolutely.
Well, that's awesome, man. And now let's recap the Oilers' thrilling 4-3 overtime win against the Washington Capitals on Wednesday. Speaking of McDavid, he scored his 30th goal of the season and franchise record 11th career overtime goal to lead the Oilers to victory at Rogers Place. It was also the Oilers' 1,500th regular season win in franchise history. And Ryan, it might have been too early to call it a must-win game, but considering how tight the playoff race is right now, these were 2 points the Oilers absolutely had to have, weren't they?
I mean, you can say that about pretty much any game right now, but those are 2 big points. Like Washington's got a really good team over there, so like that's a quality win. Like to have beaten that team twice this year now is impressive.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the overtime winner that they scored was eerily similar to the one from October 2019 when McDavid and Draisaitl came in on a 2-on-1 and beat Braden Holtby. The only difference is this time they didn't do the give and go pass. Connor just took the shot himself.
Yeah, exactly. I think they switched sides this time too. I think
they did.
Connor was on the right shooting on his off wing there.
Yeah, same end of the ice, but just reverse. And I'm glad that he took the shot. I think with a forward back, he saw a spot, and he likes to do that low 5-hole shot before the goalie can get set, and it seems to be really effective for him.
Well, it's such a deceptive release too, because he gets those hands going, and he's looking at Leon the whole time. So it was well defended in the fact that the guy took away the pass to Leon and left the goalie to face the shot. That's what you're supposed to do. But Connor is Connor, and he's going to bury that most times.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where I think the goalies just get mesmerized by how fast his hands are moving. So even when Connor was just gliding in there, he wasn't coming full blast at the goalie the way he can on an odd man rush, but the hands are moving so quick, and he basically was looking at Leon the whole way, making him think that the cross ice pass is coming there. But obviously, he just, with that quick release, didn't even look at the goalie and just fires at 5-hole. I mean, that's almost impossible for him to stop.
Oh yeah, you have no idea when that shot is coming for sure. I mean, that's something that Connor doesn't get enough credit for, I don't think. Everyone talks about his speed, and rightly so, but just his spatial awareness, his hockey intelligence, his hands are just lightning quick. I don't think all those skills get talked about enough with him.
Oh, probably not. I mean, the number one thing that comes up with Connor is that he's the fastest player in the league, but it's sort of like what you said. His mind and his hands are moving equally as quick as his feet are. So when you have all those skills coming together, it's just, you get a pretty lethal hockey player.
Absolutely.
And before that goal, it was a bit of mayhem late in the game. I think we have to start by talking about that too. The blatant missed hooking call committed by Alex Ovechkin in the final minute of the game, and that had to be the worst non-call of the entire season. It was at the very least a minor penalty on Ovechkin, but because Zach Hyman was so close to a breakaway with an empty net, you could argue that he should have been awarded an automatic goal. To me, it's just inexcusable that neither of the officials gave him a penalty for that double hook on Hyman as he was skating up the ice. And what made the ignored call even worse is that TJ Oshie scored the game-tying goal with just 1.8 seconds left on the clock. Ryan, can you remember a more egregious infraction in, that crucial of a point in the game in recent memory?
I can't say that I have, just in the last minute of that tight of a game in that situation. I can't recall ever seeing a blatant missed call like that. We're Oilers fans. We watch Connor McDavid every night, so we've seen a lot of blatant missed calls, but none that have been that crucial in a game.
No, and just to touch on that for a second, there's always, it seems like hockey observers or fans from outside of Edmonton that say McDavid complains too much about not getting enough calls, even though he's leading the league in penalties drawn. The fact is that even though he has drawn a league high 40 penalties this year, it should be probably double that. They ignore twice as many calls, if not more than that, 3 times as many calls than the ones they actually do. He should honestly draw at least 2 penalties a game, and I'm probably light on that number.
No, you're absolutely right. And I don't think that he's been leading the league in penalties drawn for the entirety of the season. I think he's taken that lead quite recently. When the team had their hot start, that was when the complaining was at its peak, right? He wasn't getting any calls because the power play was going at almost 50%. But the power play slows down, the team starts losing a bit more, and all of a sudden McDavid starts drawing some penalties.
Yeah, and I found it ridiculous at the start of the season. It was actually before the season in training camp when he was asked by, I think, Jim Matheson, do you think you should get more calls? And then Connor just said, I just want the refs to call the rules. And no one shows the question that was asked. That clip just gets shown of what McDavid said there, and it makes it look like he brought that up on his own when he was just answering a question. So it's not like he went out of his way to make a statement to the world, I want more penalties. So it's funny how that one clip sort of just added to this narrative that McDavid's complaining for calls. And honestly, he has the right to. He's the face of the game, the face of the league. And he, for the last few years, has been drawing fewer calls than someone like Brady Tkachuk. I mean, it's just, it makes you wonder why they're not calling more penalties on the Stars and protecting the stars of the game. But obviously this year it's changed a little bit. They still have a ways to go. And but getting back to Hyman, you wonder, did Alex Ovechkin, because of his reputation and longevity in the league, did the refs let him get away with that because of his status?
It's hard to say. I mean, we've seen enough examples of that over the years, and now I don't know if that's just speculation and hearsay or if there's some merit to that. But I mean, the only way I could kind of get on the ref side there is the fact that Hyman was battling with somebody else in the neutral zone as well, and they may have just straight up missed what Ovechkin did just because they were focusing on the other defender, which
they could have been puck watching.
Right.
They could have been puck watching, but it's not like it was even a light hook. I mean, there was
water skiing.
He was water skiing him, and there was a call on Warren Fogle earlier in that game where he put one arm out and just kind of spun the defender around and was called for interference. And I'm thinking, if that light touch was warranting a 2-minute penalty, then there is no way that what Ovechkin did shouldn't have had him sitting in the box too. And that pretty much would have sealed the deal for the Oilers, even if they didn't award the empty net goal and make it 4-2. If the puck is coming down the ice with, at that point, I think, under 30 seconds left, the Oilers have an offensive zone faceoff and a 5-on-4 with their goalie back in the net. It's pretty much a sure thing that they close out that game. But instead, the Caps get away with one there and then score the game-tying goal to send it to OT. So, yeah, just inexcusable in my opinion.
No, I totally agree with you. Like they messed that one up. That was a blunder. That inexcusable. I mean, you could also argue that Hyman should have gone out and blocked that shot a little more aggressively, but
he shouldn't have even had to be in the situation where that would happen. And the thing is, I get sick and tired of hearing about the officials wanting to manage the games. We don't want to give one team 6 power plays and the other team 2. It's got to be a little closer to 4-4, 4-3. It's got to even out. If there's one team committing more fouls than the other, then they deserve to be on the power play more. It's just the officials are deciding games in an effort to not be a factor in them, and that has to change.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, by trying to do that, they became a factor in the game against Washington, right? And that's not right. And like, you don't see them doing anything to try to make the scores even as they can. If a team's up 6-2, they're not bumping into players on the team that's up trying to make it easier for the other team to score, right? Like, it's professional sports. There should be no mercy.
Yeah, for sure. But thankfully, there was a silver lining to it. The poetic justice was that McDavid scored the overtime winner, picked up another multi-point game, set the franchise record for overtime goals. I mean, that to get the 1,500th win in franchise history, as I mentioned, I mean, they absolutely deserved those 2 points. If the Oilers would have missed the playoffs by 1 point this year, and that was the point that sealed it, we would look back to this game and say the refs absolutely cost us. So I'm glad that didn't happen.
Yeah, me too, for sure. They got their 1,500th win in style, we'll say that much.
Exactly. Although I think some teams in the Eastern Conference battling for a wild card spot with the Caps won't be too pleased either. Outside of Edmonton, you might see a couple other fan bases that saying, well, you just gave this team that we're battling with a point that they probably didn't deserve.
Yep, and they'd have every right to be upset about that.
Well, let's go and touch on a few other points in the game. Caps goalie Ilya Samsonov really stood on his head early in the game, and before Kyler Yamamoto finally got one past him in the second period on the power play, that kind of opened the offense up for Edmonton. And after watching Edmonton's power play struggle mightily the past couple months, I thought it looked a lot better last game, despite missing players like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Jesse Puljujarvi. I'll ask you, what do you think the power play is doing better now? And how did you think it looked overall last game?
I thought it started to look a lot better, and there's 2 reasons for that. I guess we can kind of touch on the article that I wrote now, but the article was all about the power play and what I thought was going wrong and why it's starting to look better in the last couple of games. But the big thing that I noticed was Leon Draisaitl positioned himself a little bit higher in the zone. He's above the face-off dot now rather than at it or below. So what that does is it opens up the defense a little bit more and creates a few more passing lanes. So like I felt like that backdoor tap in from Yamamoto, that wasn't happening throughout the middle part of the season just because defenses were collapsing low into the slot on us, and that pass was never open because Connor's trying to force that pass over to Leon for the one-timer every time, and defenses are reading that.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot, that's the play that the Oilers love to go to, and everyone knows that that's what the Oilers are trying to set up on the power play. And when you do it so many times and they've pre-scouted you and practiced this, defending this, that play isn't going to be there. So they have to get more creative and try new things. And I'm glad that they did that, because the goal that Yamamoto scored, it reminded me a lot of some of the goals Alex Chason scored when he was the net front guy on the power play, and Connor setting him up for tap-ins with that really quick, hard pass.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like there's been very little activity in front of the net on the power play this year, and Yamo can certainly get his nose in there and get dirty. And like I wouldn't rather have Chase on there, but I think it's just a product of the boys just trying to force that one play over to Draisaitl a little too often.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like Puljujarvi in that spot more because he's 6'4" compared to Yamamoto, who's barely 5'8", and having that big body there and a longer stick, it's certainly effective. Although you got to give Yamamoto credit for a little guy. He battles hard, isn't afraid to go to the front of the net, and he just has a good sense for where to be to get opportunistic goals like that. And I also think that Edmonton really had a little more of a shooting mentality last game. And Bouchard is a big part of that. He's such a threat to score from the point with either a slap shot or a wrist shot. He can get both through. And having a defenseman who can get that first shot through past the defense is so valuable, because we've seen so many shots get blocked from the point, whether it be, Nurse or even Clefbaum when he was still there, Sekera. So getting more shots through it is a big thing. And, that's probably the best shot the Oilers have had from the point since Sheldon Surrey played here.
I mean, that's probably true, but they're so different, right? Bush is about a subtle release and trying to get it past the blocker, whereas Surrey was just trying to pound it.
Exactly.
As hard as he could. But both are effective. Like, it doesn't have to be hard in the NHL. Like, even their wrist shots, even their soft wrist shots are harder than I could ever shoot the puck.
Exactly. And the other thing that he does really well is he opens up more time and space, because the defense know that they have to respect his shot. And that allows, someone like McDavid to have more room to work his magic down low and even set up Draisaitl for that cross-ice pass that we've been talking about. I mean, so I think that having him out there will allow for them to get more one-timers, but also it just creates more space in general to try and get at least some slot area shots. And when it comes to Draisaitl, we know he can score from anywhere in the offensive zones. He doesn't even have to be in like a prime shooting position.
Yeah, for sure. And what I've noticed watching the flow of the Oilers' power play over the last few years is that point man is basically just there to move it from one side of the ice to the other, right? Yeah. Whether it was Clefbaum, whether it's Nurse, Barry to a certain extent. Like Barry did a really good job last year of mixing in the odd shot for the exact reasons that you're just talking about, right? Like, he's not afraid to shoot it from the point either, but like he's a little more creative than Bush in terms of making some cuts. And I find that Barry just moves the puck a little bit faster than Bouchard at this point. Like, he just makes the decision to move it just that little bit quicker.
And that comes with being a veteran too, right? I mean, we're comparing a 21-year-old to a 30-year-old, but and of course, Barry led the league in points by a defenseman last year, and obviously playing with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on the power play is going to be a huge benefit to that. I mean, McDavid had a season for the ages, and Leon Draisaitl still scored 80 points himself. I mean, still over 20 behind McDavid's 105 points. Ridiculous in just 56 games. But I'm not surprised at all that Tyson Barrie was almost a point per game defenseman last year.
Yeah, no, I wasn't surprised by that at all either.
One of the other really great stories from that game was Brad Malone, and he scored his first NHL goal since December 2015 to give the Oilers a 3-2 lead in the third period. And if not for that missed call in Ovechkin, it likely would have held up as the game winner. Ryan, what can you say about a guy who grinded it out in the minors for most of the last 6 years to make it back to the show and score that big of a goal to give his team the lead in a tight hockey game?
It's a great feel-good story, isn't it? Like those were his first points since 2016 in the NHL, I believe. And
first goal since December 2015 and first point since January 2016. So over 6 years for both.
Yeah, just all the respect in the world for that. Like a guy who's grinded it out, and like he's been such a big part of Bakersfield's success too. Like he comes there with a good attitude, and he's such a mentor to the kids down there as well. It shows everybody how to play the right way and how to be a pro. And he's been a good soldier for the organization. So, and he's had a great year in Bakersfield this year as well. The production has started to come back for him, which is great to see. So, yeah, it's nice to see a guy like that get rewarded with a call up and then have a big game like he had against Washington.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I'm glad is that the organization has prioritized having their legitimate NHL prospects playing the cherry minutes down in Bakersfield. But at the same time, you need some veteran pros to show them how to play the game at this level, what it takes to make it. And I think Brad Malone has been a really good soldier for the organization. I mean, I heard Low Tide talking on his show this morning that Malone was a mentor for Kyler Yamamoto when they were down there. And he said something along the lines of when Yamamoto got called up a little over 2 years ago, I'm going to miss you, kid, but I hope I never see you again. And it's just kind of funny that they both scored a goal in the same game for the Oilers. So it's just awesome to see a guy like that, someone who's battled to make it to this level and just kept playing for the love of the game. I mean, he's not getting rich playing AHL hockey, but he did it because he loves the game and to get this second, third opportunity, whatever you want to call it, to play in the NHL. I mean, he's going to make the most of it, and I thought he had a really good game.
No, he absolutely did. And like the thing about athletes is they're all competitive, right? They all want to win. And they've all got high levels of confidence in themselves. They all grew up being one of the best players on their teams, if not the best player on their team.
Absolutely, definitely.
So it's like that honor student that goes to Harvard and then finds out that they're not the top of the class anymore. Once you get to the professional level, you've been really good. You're a hot shot all your life growing up, and then you get to the show and suddenly you're not making the team anymore, and you're in the AHL and you're grinding it out. So like that's got to be a bit of a challenge mentally for some guys. But and Malone's been one of those guys. He was a tweener for a little while at his peak, and he kept fighting and kept grinding, and he settled into a role in AHL Bakersfield, and he's been a valuable asset for the organization down there. So good on him for having that mindset.
Definitely. And, when he was called up last week, he played his 200th game in the NHL. And I'm sure he thought, like, that's the one last milestone for me. Like, I got back to the show. I got into my 200th game, and this is probably as good as it gets at age 32. But for him to score an important goal against the Washington Capitals on Wednesday Night Hockey, just it shows, the dream doesn't die with just making it. Once you get here, you can do something too. And what that game did is it earned him another game. And he's according to the lines that we saw at practice today, it looks like he'll be playing on the fourth line tomorrow night with Josh Archibald, who will be making his season debut, and Zach Kassian. So that's going to be a tough line to play against for the opposition. Yeah,
absolutely. I feel like that's a lot of physical guys that are going to be anxious to get playing. The Cassian's been out for a while. They came back against Washington. Archie, this is his first game of the year, and Malone, he's going to be happy and excited to play any NHL game.
I also thought Zach Kassian had a pretty good first game back too. I know that not everyone has been super enthralled with his overall play this season, but I mean, that backhand pass from below the goal line to set up Malone, like that was a smart play and a smart pass for him to recognized that there was a player left alone in front of the net, and Malone just roofed that shot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a nice little pass by Cassian. And I mean, there's a reason he got his $3.2 million contract, right? Like, yeah, he got most of his points playing with Connor McDavid and he cashed in on that deal. But it goes to show you, like, he does have a little bit of talent there. We wish we'd see it more consistently, but
Yeah.
It's in there.
And let's hope that as we get closer to the playoffs and with a full barn this year, because the last 2 years that the Oilers have been in the playoffs, there's been no fans there. So this will be the first time since 2017, if they get in this year, which I believe they will, that the Oilers will be playing in front of a packed house. And I think Cassian's one of those guys that just feeds off the crowd. And I feel like he's going to rise to the occasion with that playoff atmosphere and, you know, the crowd getting him into it. He could end up being a player that surprises when they get in it and has a really great series.
And I think a lot of people were using that argument for him having a bit of a rebound this season because fans are allowed back in the building, but we just haven't seen it yet. It's like, I'm really hoping you're right on that. And
Yeah.
I don't know that we should be expecting that. That's where I like the acquisition of a guy like Evander Kane, somebody else that's going to get his nose dirty and drag guys into the fight, as he said in his press conference, right? So, like, if he can drag Cassian into the fight on the nights where he's not engaged, then that's huge.
And I've thought he's probably been the Oilers' most physical player since he joined the team, aside from the production. So, I mean, very good pickup so far for Ken Holland, getting him back in January. Did anyone else really stand out to you on the Oilers in the victory over the Caps?
There's a few guys that I want to mention here. I thought the duo of Zach Hyman and Ryan McLeod were fantastic, especially in the first period. Like, Hyman was super physical in front of the net. He had a lot of chances. He just didn't get one, unfortunately. He wasn't able to bury one, but he generated a lot of chances. And Ryan McLeod is just flying out there. Like, he's got his confidence is with the puck has jumped up another level, and his speed is so useful all over the ice, with and without the puck. And, like, I thought he and Hyman generated a lot.
Yeah, and you know, I like those guys as a winger pair, and I mean, when they're playing with McDavid, that's such a fast line because Ryan McLeod is the second fastest player on the Oilers. I'm convinced of it. There are times when he's skating with the puck that I think it's McDavid for a second, and then like, oh, that's 71, not 97. But you know, he doesn't obviously have the same skill with the puck that Connor does. But when he's just flying up the ice, there's that brief moment where you're like, you know, this guy can really wheel with it, and that alone has such value. I mean, even if he doesn't go end to end and score a brilliant goal, just the ability to transport the puck from one end of the ice to the other and get it out of danger. I mean, that is a good asset to have. And Zach Hyman, I mean, he would be the third fastest guy on that line, but he's got really underrated speed. When he came to the Oilers, I didn't know that he was as good of a skater as he is. You know, you hear about the forechecking ability, you hear about the incredible work ethic, you know, that he's going to score some Smitty type goals, you know, sort of like a Ryan Smith type player, but I didn't realize that he could skate like he can.
I mean, he's got good straightaway speed. He's not the most agile guy out there, and that's not why he's out there. Like, I knew he was a good player on the forecheck, but I've kind of been marveling at just some of the things that he can do in a one-on-one battle against the wall. Like, whenever he's engaged in a one-on-one battle, he just skates backwards into a guy or does something and comes away with the puck. He just does such a great job of separating men from the puck and making a play.
You know, one of the other things that I really like that he does is he gets the puck behind the net, and he likes to come out of the net make this hard turn into the slot and kind of do a reverse spin and fire the puck on net. He just tries to get the goal. Yeah, he tries to get the goalie to scramble, and I haven't seen an Oiler do that for a while. So it's great to see him kind of add that to their offensive arsenal.
Absolutely, and getting to the middle of the ice with the puck is something that the Oilers have struggled to do for a long time. So having a guy that can force his way into the middle like that is a big asset.
Definitely. And I think he's one away from 20 goals now. So, by the end of the year, he could have 25. I know not everyone has loved every move Ken Holland has made, but to me, Zach Hyman has been a really good addition for them.
For sure. Like, he's not the top six winger I personally would have gone after, but he's come as advertised. He's been good.
Yeah. And I mean, if I'm going back to July, I was really hoping that they were going to try and make a pitch for a guy like Gabriel Landeskog. But, obviously he chose to stay in Colorado, and Zach Hyman's come here and been, everything we wanted him to be. He's a physical player. He digs pucks out of the corner. He scores some goals. And just he's definitely addressed the need for scoring on the wings, because that was something this team was really lacking last season.
Yeah, for sure. And at his price point too, like to get what we're getting out of him at that price point is not bad value. Like I thought it was going to be an overpay for him because I thought he was a glorified third liner in Toronto, and I wasn't expecting him to have the same sort of success here in Edmonton because he would likely only be playing with one of McDavid and Draisaitl, whereas in Toronto we had Matthews and Marner on his line. Here he's the second best player on his line. There he was the third best player. Right, so I wasn't expecting the results to be quite as good as they have been, but I'm wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of players who can really skate the puck, a guy who I thought had a very solid game was Phillip Roberg.
That's the only guy I was going to talk about. Yep.
Yeah, and that might have been his best or close to his best game that he's played in the NHL so far. And this is a 20-year-old kid. He's only played about 20 odd games in the NHL, so he's very raw at this point. But you can see that the talent is there, the speed is there. He actually made a really nice pass on the power play too in the second unit game out. It was sort of a touch pass into the slot for sort of a one-time, kind of a one-timer redirection. And I just think that he's got a good mind for the game. And, obviously the speed is very impressive. And as he gets older, I think this is going to be a guy who's going to be a for sure top 4 defenseman, maybe top 2, depending on, where he is at 25, 26. But you can just see the talent there, the wheels he's got. Plus to have a guy who's like 6'3" and can skate like that. I mean, it's huge for this team.
I mean, watching Broberg skate, like I remember the year he got drafted, watching him in the prospect, like the development camp, I walked over to the community rink and I watched him skate, and like all the Oilers prospect defensemen were on the ice during that session that I watched, including Evan Bouchard. And Phillip Roberg was a mile ahead of every other player on that ice surface that day, just doing the skating drills that David Pelletier was running them through. Even Bouchard was struggling with some of the detail skating drills, but Broberg was making it look easy. This was right after he got drafted.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine where this kid's going to be in a few years. Miro Heiskanen is kind of the closest comparable that I can think of. Like Heiskanen is a beautiful skater and he's got a great offensive mind as well. I think Broberg has that potential.
I mean, that would be huge if he could even become 75% of what Heiskanen is. And if we get even more than that, I mean, he was picked 8th overall, so you're hoping that you're going to get an exceptional defenseman out of him. And there was, some debate about should they have taken Trevor Zegras or not. And it's really hard to compare a forward to a defenseman because forwards make an impact in the league sooner. But he might be one of those players that you just have to wait a few extra years and it really pays off down the line because you're like, wow, we've got this 6'3", 215-pound defenseman who can fly out there. And I mean, the fact that he was a forward until he was 12 years old when he converted to a defenseman. So you can see that he has some of those forward instincts still in him.
Yeah, for sure. We started to see some of those come out at the NHL level against Washington. The confidence to carry the puck a little bit more, get a couple shots on net, make some soft touch plays like you touched on there. It's coming for him.
He had a really nice drive to the net on one play. And, as long as he can avoid getting, crunched, because it's been 2 games in a row now where he's been hit really hard, you don't want to see him sort of go down the same path that Clefbaum is, where he's injured all the time. But other than that, it's hard to find any faults that he had last game. I thought that was one of his best outings. And just also to mention one other thing, you talked about how impressive he was against the prospects in the summer of 2019. I mean, skip ahead another year to when he was in the bubble in the summer of 2020. The media were raving about his skating ability against NHL players. And at this point, he hadn't even played a single game in the league. So, and maybe some of that's attributed to it being summer hockey and he's going a little harder than the vets would, who are about to start a playoff series. But nonetheless, this is a guy who, you can see the raw talent there. It's just about putting everything together. And we have to keep in mind, he's still 20 years old. There's going to be some growing pains, but I mean, he's been knocking it out of the park in Bakersfield this year, and I thought he would actually spend the full season in the minors. So the fact that he's played NHL games at all and had some good looks while he's been here, that's a good sign for the future.
No, it absolutely is. It's a great sign for the future. And the other thing that is happening that is encouraging is the fact that he's playing on his offside right now.
Yeah.
Right? He can play both sides, which gives the Oilers a lot of options going forward.
Yeah, and that's a big asset too. And obviously, ideally, you'd love to have 3 righty-lefty pairs. And I think that for his long-term success in the league, you ideally would like him to be playing second pair left defense behind Darnell Nurse on the top pair. But
yep.
As well as now they've signed Niemelainen for another 2 years at $762,000, which is that you need a bargain contract like that on your third pair. So especially with Nurse's big ticket kicking in next season. So yeah, I just think the sky's the limit for this kid, but we just have to be a little patient.
Yeah, for sure. And like you were talking about him getting hit, and he's had 2 run-ins with Lucic this year. One in the preseason where he just got hammered in the corner. He walked away from it, but against this most recent game against Calgary too, there was another play late in the game where he got hammered into the boards. But the difference was this time he actually tried to do that little thing where the defenseman stops up a little bit and leans into the forward to try to absorb that hit and try to slowly be brushed into
probably
the boards.
The wrong player to try that against, but I'm just glad.
I think that was the right player to try that against. He just didn't execute it properly because he stopped up and then he got his toes pointing towards the boards again, and he stopped like 5 feet in front of the goal line, whereas they normally do that as they're approaching the corner. So poor kid got his skates pointing towards the boards, and Lucic hit him, and down he went.
I'm just glad he wasn't injured there, but bright things ahead for Broberg. Well, anyway, that was a great win. Let's hope they can get another one against the defending Stanley Cup champs tomorrow night. And now some exciting news from TSN's Tom Gazzola. He was on the Oil Stream with Dustin Nielsen today and revealed that the Oilers are going back to their royal blue home and away jerseys next season. Tom also confirmed that the Oilers will be keeping their current navy blue alternates, as well as adding the Todd Mcfarlane reverse retro jersey next season with sort of an updated look. Ryan, what are your thoughts on the Oilers jersey lineup for 2022-23?
I'm very curious and very excited about the new Todd Mcfarlane design that they're going to go after, because I believe that's going to be part of their reverse retro idea. So I have no idea what they're going to do with that. So I'm really excited to see that concept. I know the vast majority of Oilers fans out there are going to be pumped to hear that they're going back to the royal blue and orange. I, however, am in the minority that likes the navy and orange a little bit better. I just find that the navy gives the orange a little bit more of a contrast where I've always liked the royal and orange. Like, I was excited for those to be back in the Hope days. And I don't dislike them, but I just like the navy and orange a little bit better.
Yeah, and fair enough. I think one thing is, though, those are the jerseys that are always going to be associated with Gretzky and Messier and Coffey and all the legends of the 80s and all the Stanley Cups they won. And when you look at teams around the league like Montreal, Toronto, Chicago, Detroit, these original 6 clubs very rarely make any changes to their original look because it's such an established brand. And That's what I want the Oilers to do. I want this jersey to never go away again. It was there from their inception in the league in 1979 until 96. Then it came back from '08 to 2017. So it's been gone for 5 years again now. I want this to be back permanently now. If they want to bring in new third jerseys over the years or a fourth jersey like they're going to have next season, that's fine. But this should always be the permanent home and away set. And it's the jersey that's associated with them winning cups. And when McDavid and Draisaitl bring a cup back to Edmonton, that's the jersey I hope they're wearing. Although I would love for them to wear, I'd love for them to win the cup this spring. We're still wearing the orange one as well. But, I was reading another guy on Twitter who has some connections with OEG, and he said that the players were strongly pushing for this switch as well. So maybe they weren't as fond as the current orange jerseys. Now, when you said that you preferred the navy blue ones, are you talking about the jerseys from the 2006 Cup run?
Oh God, no! I was never a fan of those jerseys.
Oh, okay.
I didn't like the copper and the red mixed in. Like I'm talking about the
like
current.
You like what the Bakersfield Condors are wearing right now?
I don't even mind. I mean, I like the color scheme, like whether the orange is on the shoulders or it's the blue on the shoulders. It's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other to me. But I just like the orange and navy concept a little bit better than the royal and orange.
Yeah, and they also changed the shade of orange. The original orange was a little bit darker. They went to more of a highlighter, bright orange or a tangerine orange, whatever you want to call it. So,
yeah,
I mean, first of all, I loved the copper and blue jerseys that they wore from 1996 until 2007. Those were the jerseys of my childhood, so I'm always going to be fond of them. I've got several of those in my closet still, and I'll always be fond of that because I associate it with so many memories as a kid, especially like I said, the 2006 Cup run. But yeah, the orange and blue jerseys. That's what Gretzky wore. That's what McDavid should wear. It's what the Oilers' identity should be. And I heard that they have a new marketing team that isn't influenced by the previous regime. So I'm glad to see that they were able to make this switch. And like I said, hopefully it's here for good now. The one that I'm interested in is the Todd McFarlane reverse retro. Apparently it is still going to be navy blue like the original was, but I'm not sure if they're going to add some orange to it somewhere or if the look is going to be changed. But I would like to see it myself kept as close to the original as it possible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my mind was kind of spinning with possibilities, like maybe a bright silver with some navy trim or something like that, like King's helmets. I was a little worried about that, but no, like they could streamline it a little bit with change the stripes up, add a shoulder patch or something like that, right?
That's what I think we'll see. I think the base color will remain the same, the logo will remain the same, but it's like you said, they'll streamline a bit. I mean, they haven't worn this uniform since 2007 when they retired it, so it's kind of cool that it's coming back, and maybe it'll only be for 1 year. Like we saw those reverse retro white jerseys that they wore last season.
2 games.
Yeah, I think they wore them three times, and 2 of the times were on the road. So yeah. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter when there's no fans in the building, but you'd like to show off your jersey to the home fans. It also makes me wonder how many times they're actually going to be wearing the royal blue next season, because you got 41 home dates. You're probably going to wear the whites on the road 41 times. So now you have to split up those other 41 games at home between the classic royal blue as well as the existing jersey with no white on it, the navy blue and orange jersey, and the Mcfarlane. So are they going to give it to a third each? I have a feeling that we'll only maybe see the Mcfarlane and the navy blue maybe 3 times each. So it's not going to be like a regular rotation for them.
Yeah, they might do it like they've done in years past, where like home games on Saturdays are going to be the navy blue alternate or something like that. But
I was thinking about this. The last time the Oilers made the playoffs, not the last time. The last time they made the playoffs when they were still wearing the royal blue jerseys was in 2017, but they switched, if you remember, right before the playoffs, they switched their original WHA-inspired orange jerseys to their home uniforms right before the playoffs started. So the last time that the Oilers wore the royal blue jersey in the playoffs was 1992, so 30 years ago. So I'm glad that next season it'll be back and we'll get to see that jersey in the playoffs for the first time in more than 3 decades. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it's an iconic look. I'll give it that for sure.
Yeah.
Like I say, I don't dislike the royal and blue. I'll be happy to wear it and happy to see it.
Mm-hmm. For me, as long as they're winning, that's the most important thing. Oh, yeah. But if they're winning in a jersey that everyone seems to like, it makes it even that much better.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a popular and well received.
They're going to sell a ton of them. I mean, even people will say they have this jersey in their closet still from when it was last regularly worn in 2017. But they're
now you got to get an Adidas one.
Exactly, they're going to sell a ton of them. Okay, so we are 14 games into the Jay Woodcroft era in Edmonton, and since Woodcroft took over behind the bench on February 11th, the Oilers have gone 8-5-1, giving them the 11th best points percentage in the NHL over that span. And this is all while averaging 3.29 goals for per game and only 2.86 goals against per game. Ryan, what has been the biggest change that you've noticed in the Oilers' overall play since Woodcroft came in?
Well, there's a few things that I can point to. Systematically, they've gone to a more aggressive 2 forwards deep and then 1 forward hanging back forechecking system, which I think has been effective. And I think we've seen Vegas did that in their first couple of years, and they were very effective with it. So I think that's a good strategy. They're keeping the center as the high support player in the offensive zone and using him as the guy that's supposed to be backtracking back along with the defense in transition. So I think that's been working out very well as well. But I think the biggest thing for him is Warren Foegele touched on it in an interview, and Derek Ryan, I believe, touched on it as well. Just how he communicates and how detailed he is. I think Warren Foegele said, he made a comment about now everybody knows what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right. That almost sounds like a bit of an indictment on Tippett, but it's communication is huge as a coach. It's huge, and everybody needs to be on the same page and understand what's going on, and that's where they're at right now.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we all know Tippett relied heavily on his veterans when he was here. Yes. You look at in the playoffs last year, he basically benched 1/3 of his defense, not putting Caleb Jones or Ethan Bear on the ice in overtime against the Jets because he didn't trust them in that situation. And I mean, I'm not a Tippett hater. I think that he did a lot of good things while he was here and was, responsible for helping turn this team around. But you look at Woodcroft. I mean, he's made a seamless transition into this role basically because of his familiarity with more than half the roster. And I think that because he knows a lot of these guys in Bakersfield, it's helped him sort of come in and trust these guys in situations, putting out a Ryan McLeod or a Brad Malone in important situations, believing that they can get the job done. As you talked about, guys like Warren Foegele and Derek Ryan feeling like they're more a part of the team because they're not playing 5 minutes a night. There's subtle changes that he's made, and I really appreciate how you were able to break down the way that Woodcroft has constructed his lines and how they're operating in the offensive zone. I think you have a really sharp eye for that, and I like it when you break down these things with pictures in your articles. You had an article out recently where you took pictures at a game and explained what was going on frame by frame. So I think that's really cool, and it sort of helps understand the point that you're making.
Oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, you watch games, you see things happen over and over again, and I wish they would just stop doing that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's nice. It's fun to articulate it though.
Yeah. So when you're taking those, is that just a video and you're pausing it, or are you just taking a series of pictures?
No, like you're talking about the Chicago game I was
Yeah.
at, and I was looking at the neutral zone stuff. Yeah, that I was just taking videos. Like I just kind of see what I was looking for about to happen, and then I'd record. And so like I got a bunch of videos that didn't
And
make
then
the cut.
screenshot
Yeah,
the stuff
yeah,
that you wanted to show. Okay.
exactly.
And had you noticed that this was even before you had filmed that video, were you seeing this trend earlier in the game before you said, okay, well, I have to document this now and kind of explain this?
Well, it wasn't even so much that game. Like I've been noticing it for quite a while, watching the games. Like it's rare that you see five Oilers players in the screen when they're doing any kind of a breakout, and
Mm-hmm.
it's because they've got one or two wingers hanging out at the far blue line. So it was kind of neat to go through the videos and just to see some of the actions that they were running off of that and why they were doing that. And
Yeah.
but I think it leads to icing and turnovers a lot more often the way Tippett was doing it, whereas now Woodcroft has him playing a little bit more as a 5-man unit and breaking out. So I think that's going to lead to a lot more offensive zone chances in the long run.
Right. And if you prorate the goals per game over an 82 game season, since Woodcroft joined the coaching staff, the Oilers would be on pace for 270 goals in an 82 game season. And, that's some pretty impressive numbers. Earlier this year, they were scoring at an even higher rate, especially in the first month. But I hope that this is going to encourage more offense. And it's good to see that the number that they're allowing in goals per game is lower than what they're scoring per game, because it wasn't like that for a big chunk of time this season.
Yeah, I think the biggest improvement has been the goals against, right? I think the goals against were pretty much right where the goals for were, if not a little bit worse. And I mean, there was December, January, they weren't scoring many goals, but early in the year they were scoring a ton. And during the little winning bursts that they've had, they've scored a ton of goals. Like
Right.
they're not winning games 2-1. We'll say that.
Yeah, and the fact that the Oilers are averaging fewer than 3 goals per game right now on average, that's they're going to, because they have McDavid and Draisaitl. You should be able to win more hockey games than you lose just by having two superstars like that. Like they should be good for at least 1 goal a night between the two of them, or 1 point a night. And then if the rest of the team can even chip in here a little bit here and there, they're going to win a lot more games than they lose. So I like the changes he's made. I think that he's getting everyone more involved, like I said, and it's just it looks like they're having more fun again, and he sort of brought that back to the team, because there was a lot more slumped shoulders, I feel like, the last little bit when Tippett was there, and now it just sort of seems like everyone's rejuvenated and ready to make a run at this as they get ready for the playoffs.
Well, the last 2 months under Tippett were so stressful for so many reasons. The team was losing. We had Omicron happening. There was a COVID wave going through the team. It was like -20, -30 in Edmonton for like a month straight. So like everyone was just depressed and miserable. And
Well, I think they lost 12 straight games, right? I think they lost 12 straight with him behind the bench. The only 2 they won were the games he missed with COVID protocol.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they went 2-11-2. They had a 6-game losing streak, 1-2 without Tippett, and then I think they went on to lose 7 more in a row after that.
Yeah. Do you think that the Oilers will bring Jay Woodcroft back next year, even if the Oilers miss the playoffs?
I sincerely hope they do. Like, I don't know what will happen. I don't. What's his record? 8-5-1 right now. Yeah. Like, I don't think we can blame Woodcroft for them not making the playoffs if they fail to make it. So I really do hope that they extend him, just because, like, I fully believe in, it's the stock market principle is what I call it, right? You don't buy stocks when they're at their highest points. So that's what they've done previously. They want to bring in the experienced coach, your Todd McClellan, your Ken Hitchcock, your Dave Tippett. Right, but they've hit their peak already. Like, they've achieved what they're going to achieve unless they get a little lucky, right? And Jay Woodcroft, he's coming in on the ground floor. We're buying this stock really cheap. So,
yeah, I mean, you look, Todd Nelson, when he was brought in halfway through the 2014-15 season, he didn't have a sparkling record, but it was a lot closer to 500 on a team that, was absolutely dreadful, and ended up drafting Connor McDavid first overall, thankfully, later that year. But I would hate to see something like that happen to Jay Woodcroft, where Nelson comes in, is here for half a year, and then he's out of a job. And, he got promoted for half a season to come up from then Oklahoma City to Edmonton, but doesn't retain the position when they hire Todd McCullough. So he's just out of work altogether. And I really think that another team would snatch up both Jay Woodcroft and Dave Manson, actually. So I hope that the organization is smart enough to keep those guys around, because Manson's done great work with the defense, both at the AHL level and now in the NHL level. And I think that he's a valuable member of this coaching staff. And obviously Jay Woodcroft is a good young coach too. And I think that he's a coach that can grow with this team and, eventually, hopefully guide them to a Stanley Cup. So I would be really disappointed if they didn't keep him. And I have a feeling that he will stick around regardless.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you're right. And I'm like, not only Todd Nelson's a good example, but we go back a little bit further to Ralph Kruger, right? Yeah. Like the lockout shortened season where Nail Yakupov actually showed a little bit of talent. But then the infamous Skype conversation and Dallas Eakins and
they call
what happened after that.
Yeah, exactly. And then Craig McTavish has even said he went into that interview with then Marley's head coach, Dallas Eakins, looking at him as an assistant coach. And he was so impressed with his interview that he fires the head coach and makes him head coach. I mean, arguably, if you could go back, that's something you might not want to do. But, I've said this before on this podcast. I try not to feel bad about anything that happened before McDavid got here now, because everything that happened prior to that 2015 draft lottery led to the Oilers being in a position to get McDavid. So I've pretty much let everything go after that. I might have some gripes with stuff that's happened since, but anything that happened pre-2015 is water under the bridge as far as I'm concerned now.
No, that's totally fair. Like, there were 3 players in that era that if teams were sucking throughout that stretch, they needed that as a reward. It was McDavid, it was Nathan McKinnon, and it was Aaron Ekblad. And I think we got the best one out of the 3. We
did. Now, I mean, there is nothing against Taylor Hall. I mean, he was previously my favorite player. And, obviously you get Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who is still an excellent two-way player for the Oilers, and they miss him a lot right now. But can you imagine if instead of the 3 straight that they got in Hall, Nugent Hopkins, and Yakupov, the 3 straight they got were McKinnon, Ekblad, and McDavid?
Oh my God.
Or the Oilers ended up actually getting 4 first overall picks. So add Austin Matthews to the mix there too.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, timing is everything in life, hey?
Yeah, and you know what? I was in Toronto visiting my sister in 2016, right at the end of the season, and I was watching that last Oilers game. It was the Oilers versus the Canucks. And Patty Maroon scored a goal late in the third period to send it to overtime. And the Oilers ended up losing in overtime.
That was Ryan Smith's last game, wasn't it?
No, it was that was in 2014, his last game. They always seem to play the Canucks in the season finale. Yeah, they've done it several times. But was it the Sedin's last game? I don't think it was. I think they were 2018. But regardless, so the game. Oh, you know what it was? It was the previous game was the final game at Rexall Place. That was game 81, and then game 82 was played in Vancouver. Oh. And I'm watching this game on TV, and the Oilers lost in overtime it was a shootout. The Oilers lost in a shootout to the Canucks. And if they wouldn't have made it to overtime, if they would have lost in regulation, if Patty Maroon didn't score that goal, Edmonton would have picked first overall for an unprecedented 5th time in 2016.
Yeah, I remember something like that, yeah.
And can you imagine if they would have drafted Austin Matthews too, and he was a part of this group?
My God.
I don't even know how they would fit all these guys under the cap.
No, they wouldn't.
But the prospect of watching McDavid and Matthews, I know Toronto always talks about those 2 guys playing in Toronto, but seeing both those 2 in Edmonton would be just absolutely ridiculous.
That would be hilarious.
I mean, Matthews would probably score 70 goals with Connor setting him up, and Connor would maybe have like 150 points by now.
Yeah, like
But
2 points a night kind of deal.
yeah, exactly. But anyway, that's a kind of a long tangent off talking about Woodcroft. But I think we're both on the same page that we hope he keeps his job and sticks around.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to talk to you about the goaltending situation now. Mikko Koskinen is 8-1-2 in his last 12 appearances with a .918 save percentage, a 2.58 goals against average, and 1 shutout. Meanwhile, Mike Smith has been less than stellar, to say the least, this season, and the Oilers just loaned Stuart Skinner to the Bakersfield Condors earlier today, now that Smith has finished his or recovered from his COVID-related, unrelated sickness, I should say. How confident are you in the Oilers' 3 goalies as they go down the stretch drive here and into the playoffs, hopefully?
I'm mildly confident. I know Koskinen's playing about as good as we could ever expect him to play right now. Like, he's been really good. Mike Smith is obviously a shell of his former self right now, even when we compare him to last year. And Stuart Skinner surprised me. Like, he's actually been really good this year. Like, he's further ahead than I expected him to be. But they've been second place in the division for the last 2 years of this goaltending tandem. So yes, they have their warts, they have their flaws, but ultimately they've been doing well enough in the regular season. This year, Koskinen had his struggles, for sure, and Smith is struggling right now, and he's been injured. But I have faith that they can turn it around, but we can't keep waiting, though.
I mean, it shows what a difference a year makes, because at this time last year, I was saying on this podcast that Mikko Koskinen isn't inspiring much confidence in the team, and you can't really trust him in there. Meanwhile, Mike Smith is having, I won't say a Vezina caliber season, but he was pushing to be a top 5 goalie in the league the way he was
people
playing.
People were talking about him for the Vezina.
Yeah, I mean, I think he finished 7th in Vezina voting. So
That's
great. still a pretty impressive season. Like, for a 39-year-old, he had a season for the ages for a goalie of that vintage. But you look at this year, it's completely the opposite. Mikko Koskinen has basically had to carry the load for most of the season because Mike Smith got hurt in the third game of the year against the Ducks when Devin Shore fell on the back of his leg and missed several months. Then he came back and got COVID, and Mikko
sprained his thumb.
Yeah, and Mikko Koskinen has probably played his best hockey in the NHL since he joined the Oilers in 2018. And I mean, this is almost certainly his last year here, regardless of how he plays, just by a simple numbers situation. I mean, Stuart Skinner has to be on the team next year because he's not waiver exempt anymore. So he's one of your 2 goalies. Mike Smith is still under contract. I guess you could bury him in the minors if you wanted to, but the way that Koskinen's playing right now, I mean, he's playing like a legitimate starting goalie. As I mentioned, I mean, that .918 save percentage is pretty close to elite, just under elite level numbers for a 12-game stretch here. Only 1 regulation loss in that time. He should be starting tomorrow night against the Lightning. I would definitely go to him. I think that if he would have played that game against the Lightning a few weeks ago, the Oilers probably win that game because they outplayed them in their own building. They just didn't get the saves.
Yeah, and aside from those 2 goals, I didn't have a huge problem with those 2 goals, to be honest with you. Like, he was getting a lot of heat for them, but like the first one was a kind of a weird bounce, like guy sliding into him, and it went in off a Shore skate. I mean, you look at the slow motion replay on that, and it looks like Smith could have maybe made a save there, but like in real time, when your body's going one way and puck's going the other, it's a tough save to have to make. And then the second one, right at the end of the period, I think there was 14 seconds left. I think it was Stamkos that did a little.
Yeah,
he came from behind the net, spun around, but that shot, I think Lagesson got a piece of that puck right when Stamkos released it.
Yeah, I mean, it's still one that I think he has to stop. I mean, it's a B grade. It's a B grade, maybe even a C grade shot from where he took it, and he got beat up high, short side. You need that save, especially because I think less than a minute before that, McDavid had scored on the power play to tie the game. And here I was thinking they're going to go into the dressing room at the intermission tied 1-1, and then Stamkos gets that goal with like 17 seconds left to retake a 2-1 lead. Those are just the deflating goals that, kill momentum. And, I think what made it even worse is there was a point in the game where Mike Smith was caught kind of berating the young defensemen on the team. I think it was Marcus Niemelainen and Phillip Roberg that he was kind of barking at for, their defensive coverage on the first goal, I think. So, if you're gonna chew out your 20 and 23-year-old defensemen for a mistake they made, you have to be playing stellar hockey too. You can't be playing the way you are and giving them crap. Like, you have to, be on top of your game, and he hasn't been lately. And I mean, I want Mike Smith to succeed. I want him to get back to the form he was last year. But if he's just simply unable to right now, then Stuart Skinner should be the guy in there.
You can make that argument for sure, but at the other time of it, like, Ken Holland came into the season with a plan of having Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen be the goaltenders this year, and he hasn't really had that opportunity because, like you said, Mike Smith was hurt third game of the year.
Yeah.
So right now you got Mikko Koskinen playing great hockey, but we've watched Mikko Koskinen long enough to know that he struggles when the workload gets big.
Yes, you do see some of the quality drop out of his game the more he plays. But I mean, really, they've had 2 days off now. After tomorrow night, they're going to have another 2 days off. So there's no reason he can't start on Saturday night and then again next week. And there's playing 3 teams next week, and I believe the 3 of them are currently ranked in the standings 23rd, 27th, and 29th. I mean, when you are in this tight of a playoff race and you've got 3 beatable teams coming up, all 3 games at home, by the way, those are 3 games you have to win. And maybe they only win 2 of those 3 games, but you have to win at least 2, hopefully all 3. And you would just hate for the Oilers to waste another strong effort by the group because their goalie let them down. So is Mikko Koskinen going to play all 3 of them? Is Stuart Skinner going to get recalled and play another one? It seems unlikely. So I wouldn't be surprised if Koskinen plays 2, Smith plays 1, and you just hope that he can, give them a game that, they can beat teams like Detroit, Buffalo, New Jersey. Like these are teams that they have to beat because there's tough games coming up ahead. And, if you can get these points in winnable games, I mean, that's going to be huge towards getting back into the playoff race.
Yeah, 100%. I think the way I would do it is, I think Woodcroft confirmed that Koskinen is starting tomorrow, which is exactly what I would do. This is because Smith's last start was last Saturday against Montreal, so about a week ago now. And Mikko's playing Saturday, and then they don't play again until Tuesday. So it'll be about a week and a half between starts for Mike Smith. Like, hopefully that's enough practice time for him to get his gear, to get his stuff in order.
Yeah, but we've also said that before the season, and it hasn't been enough. I really think that lingering injury is still affecting him, and he hasn't had enough reps this year. And as you get older, I mean, he turns 40 years old this month. As you get older, and because he hasn't been in there as much, he's just not at the level we need him to be at. And simply put, I don't know how many starts they can give him the rest of the way. Like, if you're 2 points out of the playoff picture and you got a team rolling into town that you think you should beat, and he lets in 5 goals and the Oilers only score 4, it's going to be one of those ones where it's like, did we make a mistake not starting Koskinen? Because I'm convinced if they start him in that game in Tampa, like we talked about on their road trip, they win that game, and then you're coming back to Edmonton with a 3-1-1 road trip as opposed to a 2-2-1 road trip against some very strong teams. I mean, they played Carolina to a 1-goal loss. They beat the Panthers 4-3, and they lost 4-3 to the Lightning. So I mean, it's just, they've shown that they can play against the top teams of this league, and that's one, they're not even healthy. Wait till they get Nuge back. Wait till they get Puljujärvi back. These are guys who are going to make the team even better. But they have to get that goaltending. You can't have your goaltender let your team down.
Oh, for sure. And like when Smith came back and like right out of the All-Star break, there was a lot of hockey being played and not a lot of practicing being done. And obviously Mike Smith, I think you're right. He might have still been feeling some lingering effects of the injury and he hadn't had the reps and it was just too much. So I think now that he's had a week and he'll have about a week and a half between starts and to just focus on getting his game back, I think there's a chance that he goes a first period without allowing 2 goals for once.
Let's hope. I mean, let's hope. That's such a hole to dig out of. I mean, again, with Montreal last week on Hockey Night in Canada, you're down 2-1 after 20 minutes again. It's just like, do we have to chase every game? The Oilers have scored the first goal 17 times this year in 58 games, which is the fewest in the entire league that they've scored first. It's unthinkable with a team with this much talent that they're always down 1-0. And it'd be great for this team to play with the lead a little more often. And I hope that happens down the stretch here.
It's going to have to happen a lot more down the stretch because they're undefeated when they score first. I'm pretty sure.
Exactly. They are. And I believe they're also undefeated when leading after 20 minutes as well. So it just shows what happens. I mean, they don't do it very often, but when they do, they usually win.
Yeah, no, there's a big correlation between scoring first and winning games in the NHL.
There is.
And like the Oilers are living proof this year.
For sure. All right, let's move on to Evander Kane now. And since joining the Oilers on January 29th, Kane has 9 goals and 14 points in 19 games, which is good for third in team scoring over the past 6 weeks. And he only carries a $2.1 million cap hit, largely due to his many off-ice issues, but it's still a benefit for the Oilers, and he can become a UFA in the summer. Ryan, based on how Kane has performed so far, do the Oilers have to strongly consider re-signing him?
I think if you're basing it just on the performance alone and not evaluating anything else right now, then yes, of course. He's got 14 points in 19 games. Like he's producing like
9 goals.
He's forward.
He's scoring. I mean, he's on pace for like a 40-goal season.
And the impressive part to me is he's done it with very few power play points so far. He's done most of his damage at even strength, which has been a big problem for the Oilers. Right, and getting the secondary scoring aside from McDavid and Draisaitl at even strength. That's been a big problem, and Kane is helping to address that.
Right, and we've talked about what how depleted they were for talent on the wings last season, and then getting Hyman, that helps address it. Puljujarvi taking another step forward, gets them another step in the right direction. But now you bring in a guy like Kane, who is a legitimate top 6 forward, arguably a top line forward, and a guy who has scored 30 goals in this league before. He's joining the fold on a value contract, a bargain, absolute bargain. And what this not only does is it gives the Oilers a big, strong power forward who can put the puck in the net, but it also allows them to shift Nugent Hopkins back to his natural position and play center. And, that gives the Oilers a stronger third line. So bringing him in affects the entire lineup in a positive way. And I think the only thing you could wonder about Kane, aside from is his reputation going to continue to follow him here and have him slip up in some way. But the only thing that I worry about other than that is what the cost is going to be to keep him. Because if he's going to command, like what he was making $7 million a year in San Jose. So I don't think he's ever going to make that type of money again. But if he's looking for a $5 million a year deal or $6 million a year deal, that's just not in the cards. The Oilers are just going to have to part ways and say, hey, thanks for helping us make the playoffs. And he'll hopefully say, thanks for helping me reestablish some value. We shake hands and go our separate ways. But if he wants to stay with this team and feels like he's in a good spot to have success here, then he's going to have to come in at a much lower cap hit, probably not much more than he's even making right now. And even if he did want to make $3 million a year, well, the Oilers still have to find the cap space for that because, I mean, you've got Koskinen coming off the books, but Darnell Nurse's new contract is going to kick in. Puljujarvi needs a new contract. Yamamoto needs a new contract. So they'd probably have to trade out Tyson Barrie. They'd probably have to trade out like I said, Zach Kassian. So these are moves that they could potentially make to keep Kane, but it's not going to be as simple as if he wants to stay, they can keep him. There's some financial aspects that have to be worked out here.
Yeah, that's why I kind of said if you base it on production alone, yes, of course. But there's the other side of it that you just touched on, the salary cap, and what does Evander Kane want, and what can the Oilers afford to give him? Those might be two very different things.
Right.
Because if I'm Evander Kane and I've just coming off of a long-term $7 million per year contract, and now I'm suddenly making just over $2 million, like we know Evander wants to make more money than that. Like we know he's going to ask for more, and he's likely going to want a little bit of security. But if I'm the Oilers, I'm weary just because of what you said, his off-ice reputation.
Right. And he's about to turn 31. So, I mean, he's, he's still scoring at an excellent level. And, I don't think there's going to be a huge drop off in the next couple of years. It's not like he's 35, but, when I look at this player, like, is he going to still be in a position where he can play in the top 6? Dylan Holloway's coming along. Is Holloway going to eventually be your top line left winger? Well, does that push Hyman down to second line? And does that push Kane down to third line? You have to fit in all these guys. And I still think you can never have too much skill. So, if someone does get pushed down to the third line and they're making $5 million like Hyman is, it's not ideal. But if you can have as many good players on the forward group as you can, I mean, that just improves their chances of winning. So I would like to keep him if at all possible. It just depends, like we said, what the cap is. So I'll ask you, if Holland is able to shed enough space to fit him in the books, what would be your best offer to Evander Kane in terms of term and dollar figure?
I certainly wouldn't go long term, just for his age and
just
for
absolute best offer on the table. Take it or leave it.
Best offer. I'm going, we got to remember the Oilers have $11.7 million of space for 7 roster spots next year, and you got to think about Holloway and Broberg.
That's what I'm saying. Like they do have some cheap contracts coming in. Like Holloway's under $1 million. Niemelainen's pretty close to league minimum. I'm just saying, like, if let's just for this scenario say that they can trade Tyson Barrie for picks or prospects, or they can get rid of Zach Kassian's contract and not have to retain any money. When he's stepping into the office with you and he's saying, okay, what do you got for me? Like, what would you give him?
I'd probably start with about like 3x3 is probably about as high as I would go.
I'm pretty close to that too, because I really, because then by the time that contract's expiring, he's close to 34. And I think that's right where you would want to be separating at that point, because, that's when I think you're going to start to see some decline in his production after that. But if you could keep him around for 3 years for the heart of McDavid's, prime at a reasonable cap hit, I think that's something they have to strongly consider.
Yeah, for sure. Like, you look at a lot of the moves that Holland made this year, they signed a bunch of guys to 3 and 4 year deals, and that's about the length of contract that Leon and Connor both have. I know Leon's got 1 less year than Connor, I believe, or it's the other way around. But
the other thing is, the Sharks still, because they bought out Kane, he's still owed money for the rest of this year and the next 3 years, which will be paid out over a longer period of time because of the buyout. But at $7 million a year, they still owe him $21 million after this season. So he's got paychecks coming in. You would hope that with that money secured, that he could, take a smaller cap number in Edmonton. So you got two paychecks coming all the time, and hopefully you're on a good team, because in San Jose they're kind of rebuilding, and here in Edmonton, we're trying to push to be contenders. So that would be something that I would hope would be attractive to Kane, and he'd be willing to take a little bit less money to be on a good team.
Yeah, and given where the Oilers are right now and where they want to be and when they want to get there, a guy like Evander Kane, who's like in his prime or nearing the end of it, that's kind of a good fit on a short-term deal right now. Whereas, like, if we keep adding more and more young guys, we need to have those guys in the system, and we need to have some guys contributing. But
Yeah.
if we want to win Stanleys and we want to win them now, you got to have guys like Kane who are at their peak right now.
Exactly. And I also think if they end up playing a team like Calgary in the playoffs, you're going to be really glad you have that guy, because he could be the answer to someone like Matthew Tkachuk.
Yeah, absolutely. They had a little bit of a little exchange in the face-off circle coming starting the third period in the game last week.
Yeah. And
right?
The Oilers had their way with them the first 2 games of the year, beating the Flames on home ice. And, they lost a 3-1 game that was pretty much a 2-1 game for most of the night. So I'm just saying, when this team gets healthy, I'm still convinced that they could beat Calgary in a 7-game series.
Oh yeah, I'm not scared of Calgary. Like they're playing out of their skin right now. Like this is like unprecedented a level of hockey that the Flames are playing at. I don't think they have the capability of going deep and like playing at this level for however many more months.
And you look at the Oilers 2-11-2 stretch that they had in the middle of the season. There were a couple games there where they let in the game-winning goal in the final 10 minutes of the game. If even both of those games get to overtime, now you're looking at 2 extra points. Say they even win 1 more of those games, now you're looking at 4 extra points. They're a lot closer to Calgary than they are right now. So they just don't have the overtime losses that a lot of teams do. And maybe they win those games that they push to overtime. So I think that the standings might be a little bit deceiving as to how far ahead Calgary is. I think they have, I think, 4 more wins than the Oilers. So it's not that big of a gap. And, if these two teams play in the playoffs, I think it would be an electric series, first of all. And I do think that even though Calgary might be favored right now, we know how McDavid and Draisaitl will play in the Battle of Alberta. And I think that it would be big trouble for them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun to watch for sure. But the Calgary just doesn't have the same firepower. Like, I'll give them a lot of credit for the way they've played over the last while. Like the Oilers went 16-5 in their hot start, and Calgary's beaten that record in the last little while. I think they're like 17-3-1 or something in the last little stretch here. So good on them. But I just don't think they have the horses.
No. All right, well, let's finish up tonight by talking about some potential trade targets for the Oilers ahead of the March 21st deadline. First off, what position do you think the Oilers should be looking to upgrade the most? And secondly, are there any names specifically that you think are realistic options for the Oilers to acquire?
I think ultimately they're in a position where they're not going to be making any sort of big deals. Like I think it's going to be depth rentals, and I think the defense is kind of where you need to be. You look at the 6 that are up here right now. You got Broberg, you got William Lagesson, who are both really young. Even Bouchard, who we expect to be a regular, is still quite young. Like even at full health, like you might have a Chris Russell back there, but I think we could upgrade on Chris Russell pretty easily for cheap to play that third pairing lefty spot and just offer a little bit more insurance for if something does happen in the playoffs. So a couple names that I'd throw out there, and I'm going to qualify this by saying that the Oilers only have, realistically, I did some math earlier, about $1.34 million to work with, and then you can add the value of any outgoing contracts.
Yeah, it would have to be money, right? I mean, it's got to be, if not fully, at least close to money in, money out.
Yeah, like right now, today, depends on what site you look at, but Cap Friendly has them at like, I have the exact number, $591,304 in cap space.
I saw you tweeted that earlier today too.
Yeah, just to bring Archie back, they had to send 2 guys down. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to afford to activate them from LTIR. So now we're at a 21-man active roster with under $600,000 of cap space.
Yeah.
Right. So that tells you what to expect at the deadline. Not much. But some guys that we could potentially go after, and we got to remember the rental deadline. We got to look at teams that are out of contention, that are going to be sellers, and that are looking for picks and prospects in exchange. So one guy that I got three defensemen on here that I'll talk about. Robert Hagg out of Buffalo is one of them. $1.6 million. Like, he's more of a physical shutdown type guy, which is, I think, the style of play that we need right now.
Probably what they're looking for, yeah.
Yeah. Another name that's been thrown out there a lot recently is Justin Braun out of Philadelphia, a right shot D, $1.8 million. But history with Jay Woodcroft in San Jose, and again, big shutdown guy. That would be a nice piece for him as well. Sorry, I lied to you. There's going to be four names. A name that I'm really curious about and interested in is Andy Green out of the Islanders. Yes, he's old. He's 39 years old, but he carries a cap hit of some league minimum $750K. He's been on two Islanders teams in the last 2 years that have gone to the conference finals, and he's played very well in a bruising shutdown role for them. So I think he'd be a really interesting piece to look at.
Yeah, and there's some options there. I think that you're on the right page though. Like, they will probably look to bring in a defenseman as opposed to a goaltender. We've already heard that Marc-Andre Fleury and Semyon Varlamov have both rejected trades to Edmonton because of their limited no movement clauses. So, it seems like the goalie market, even though that's probably an area that the Oilers would like to upgrade, and we know that Ken Holland tried last summer to bring in a goalie. He was really in on Darcy Kemper and kind of just fell short. I think the asking price was a first-round pick and Dmitry Samorukov. And you could argue that maybe the Oilers should have made that deal, but it's for 1 year of Kemper because, maybe he doesn't re-sign in Edmonton. And is it worth it to give up one of your top defensive prospects you've been developing for the past 4 years plus your first-round pick for a 1 year goalie? I think that, he might have honestly made a good decision by not doing that trade, but obviously now here we are looking for a goaltender. The defense seems to be the way they're going to go. Evander Kane was sort of their default deadline pickup. They just got him a couple months early, and they were able to bring him in, like we talked about already, for a reasonably low cap hit. Getting a defenseman is going to be probably where they need to go. Of the guys you mentioned, is there anyone that you think should be the top target of those guys?
I think just based on the asking price and the cap hit, like, we got to keep the cap hit as low as we can just to have some flexibility for injuries and call-ups during the rest of the season. Like, Andy Green's a guy that I'm really curious about. The other guy that I'm kind of half interested in is Eric Gustafson out of Chicago.
Former Oilers draft pick. And I believe he was with Montreal in the playoffs last year on that Stanley Cup finalist team, if I remember correctly. But I think he would be an interesting piece to look at as well, just as a 6-7D kind of guy. I still sometimes wonder why they never signed him. I mean, maybe they just didn't see it, but I remember even hearing pretty good scouting reports on him at Oilers development camp back in, I don't know when, 2012, 2013, something like that. So it's just kind of surprising that he didn't end up getting an entry-level deal.
I thought this was all water under the bridge now, Eric.
No, I mean, I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering why it didn't happen. I mean, I've let it go, but I mean, it's just it just doesn't make sense. I can still be frustrated with things that happened after, like Edmonton not drafting Alex DeBrincat in the second round in 2016. I'm almost more frustrated with that decision. And, I like Tyler Benson too, and I think he's, a decent hockey player at the NHL level, but that's one that kind of still confuses me.
Yes.
Like, this was McDavid's shooter in junior, and it's a guy who probably would score 50 goals in the NHL if he had Connor setting him up night after night. So that's
there were questions about DeBrincat just because of his size and all that too.
I mean, every team in the league passed on him, so it's not just Edmonton. Like, even the Chicago Blackhawks passed on him before they took him in the second round.
Yep,
but it's just
proving everybody wrong.
Yeah, I mean, a 5'6" guy, they thought, is he going to translate to the NHL? And then some people said, well, Edmonton doesn't like to take small players. And then, of course, the following year in 2017, they draft Kyler Yamamoto. But it's just, that's one. But I can let the Gustafson one go. Hopefully, if he does come in, it would be a long time homecoming, sort of like when Tobias Reeder finally made his Oiler debut like 10 years after he was drafted, although that didn't go as well as planned.
Never did score a goal, did he?
Never did score a goal with the Oilers, no.
Well, that's pretty similar. Good example for sure.
One player that I would be interested in, also from the Flyers, not Braun, is Travis Sanheim. And he's 25 years old, about to turn 26. He's got a long frame, like he's 6'3", but he's not an overly bulky guy. I think he's only 181 pounds, and he leans more towards the offensive side of the game than to sort of make up for his shortcomings in his own end. But I just wonder if he could come in and be a little bit more of a puck moving guy. I mean, he's got a $4.6 million cap hit, so they would have to probably trade Tyson Barrie out, and he's got 20 points in 55 games. So there's some decent production there, but I just wonder if bringing in someone like that would be of interest to the team. I don't think that he's going to be the target, even though the Flyers are rebuilding. Someone like Braun probably is more of a logical guy, because it's like you said, as much as they'd love to have another guy who can move the puck up ice and chip in some offense, they're probably looking to suppress some goals too.
Oh, 100%. Like, they've got a lot of puck movers on this team already. Like, you could look at Darnell Nurse in that mold, especially on the right side. Like, you got Evan Bouchard and Tyson Barrie, who are kind of redundant.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Right now you got a Broberg up here who plays that same sort of way. And, like, with the way that the team was leaking goals at the start of the season, it would be really nice to add a shutdown guy into that mix.
Definitely. So do you think, like, if you had to make your best prediction, just to kind of wrap up the show here, like, if you had to make your best prediction, like, do you think the Oilers do anything at all? Does Holland kind of decide to sit patiently and not make a move? What do you think happens here?
I think the next week and a bit is going to say a lot about what Holland does. I don't think he even knows what he's going to do at this point yet, because like he's shown he's willing to spend. Like, in each year he's been here so far, he's made some kind of move at the deadline, whether it was Athanasio and Ennis in the 1 year, or it was Mike Green.
Yeah, he likes to bring in a veteran defenseman. Green is in 2020, Kulikov in 2021. So maybe we get a guy like that. They'll bring in a veteran, because you can never have enough veteran defensemen, right?
Yeah, and like everybody knows that missing the playoffs is not an option this year.
It's not an option.
Like, I think he'll do something, but like, we've outlined the cap situation, and the Oilers don't have any assets. Like, they don't have any draft picks this year. Basically, they got their first, the second, and the third are tied up in the conditions of the Duncan Keith deal. They don't have a fourth, so really you got your first, and then your fifth, your sixth, your seventh. Yeah, right? That's not going to yield you a whole lot.
I mean, last year they did get Matvei Petrov in the 6th round of the draft, and that's looking like an excellent pick. He scored his 31st goal of the season as an OHL rookie tonight. So, I mean,
that's a great looking pick. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, props to Holland and Tyler Wright and their staff for finding that guy. But you're right. Like, I mean, on paper, a 6th round pick isn't an overly attractive asset. Sometimes you have to hit it out of the park like they did there with that guy. But overall, yeah, it's not gonna get you much in a trade.
No, for sure, it definitely won't. So, like, I could definitely see a depth of defenseman being added. One other guy I want to look at in Philly as well, and to totally change it up a little bit and go forward here, Derek Brassard.
Okay.
Like, we could really use a guy to play that third line center role. Nuge is giving the team what we need there right now, but I personally don't think that's where he's going to thrive the most. It's like, and you can never have too many guys that can play center. But like Derek Brassard, expiring contract, veteran player, playoff experience, and he's producing at like a half a point a game pace almost this year. It's like he's still got some offensive pop left in him. So I think that's a guy that's potentially worth targeting out of Philadelphia as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I thought you were going to get really bold for a second there and say Claude Giroux.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I wish, but yeah, nope.
That one's probably not in the cards for us. But, the way I look at it, the Oilers' fate is really in their own hands. I mean, Vegas lost again tonight. Pittsburgh did us a solid by beating them. They still have 2 head-to-head games against LA, who are ahead of them in the standings. They got a game against Calgary. They've got another 2 games against Anaheim, I believe. So, I mean, these are all divisional opponents. They're done playing the Canucks already, but
they've got Dallas a couple times.
They've got Dallas. Dallas, but you know what? I'm not even looking, and maybe I should, but I'm not looking at the wild card picture as much. And yes, Dallas is a team that they will have to play again in Edmonton as well. So it's just, I'm not thinking about Nashville. I'm not thinking about Dallas and looking at, sneaking into one of those wild card spots and playing either Colorado or Calgary in the first round. I'm looking to lock up a top 3 spot in the Pacific, and I think that's what the Oilers' focus should be. And they should be planning to, if not get home ice advantage like they have the past 2 years, at least go through their own division and not have to slug it out going through the Central Division. It's just playing Vegas or playing LA. I think they can finish ahead of Vegas right now, because I mean, you look at that team. They're depleted. Their goalie is out long term. I mean, they're missing some guys, and even though the Kings have had a rebound year this year, they're not a team that I'm overly scared of either. I think the Oilers could beat them in a 7-game series as well. So when they have all these games against divisional opponents left, as long as you take care of your own division, and Edmonton actually has a very strong record against the Pacific Division this year. So if they can continue that trend, then they should be in a good spot going into the playoffs, and I think they will get there.
Yeah, no, you make a good point. Like, they've done really well against their division this year, and like those are the swing games. Those are the 4-point games that really matter. I mean, they should try to beat Dallas too, for good measure, just in case they do have
exactly
a wild card spot. But you're right; they should absolutely have higher aspirations. Like, with Mark Stone and Robin Leonard being out of Vegas and them just not playing up to their level, and Jack Eichel, who's just come back after not having played hockey for like a year, so like, it's going to take him some time to get his feet underneath him. So like, that's a vulnerable team. And the Kings, they just lost Arvidsson for a little while. Like, Coliseum, he was out. So like, that's an important piece for them. So
that's a good point
there's
too.
Opportunity.
There definitely is. And I mean, if you get that second wild card spot and you have to play the Colorado Avalanche, your old favorite team, that's not a promising matchup for Edmonton in the first round of the playoffs. So,
but if I'm Colorado and I see the Oilers as my wild card opponent in the first round, I'm not impressed. Like, that is a dangerous wild card team.
It is. And you know what? When you get McDavid in the playoffs, anything could happen. I mean, obviously last year, he was still a point per game player despite being absolutely abused night after night against the Jets and not drawing a single penalty. But I won't even go down that road. We're too late in the podcast.
We're trying to repress those memories.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just, if they get in, even if they don't get home ice, let's just say that they get third in the Pacific and they have to start on the road against the Kings. I'm fine with that. I think that that's a series that they can win. And then you've got Calgary potentially having to face a tough wildcard team themselves because of, the strength of the Central. Maybe they have to play Nashville in the first round. Maybe they have to play Dallas, depending on how they do. You look at a couple of years ago, they were the top seed in the Western Conference and they got eliminated in the first round by Colorado before the Avs had really taken off as a true cup contender. And if, maybe the Oilers play Calgary in the second round, we get that long awaited Battle of Alberta. But I think the best spot for the Oilers is to be in that number 2 or number 3 spot in the Pacific, and that's probably where they're going to land.
No, I definitely agree with you. That would be the ideal scenario. Get the Kings in the second, or get the Kings in the first round.
Mm-hmm. Take it from there. I think the path to the conference final, going through their own division, is an easier path than having to go through the Central.
100%. Like, the Central, like, you got Minnesota, you got St. Louis. So even if you do somehow upset Colorado, that second round matchup is not good. Like, look at what Minnesota's done to us in 2 games this year. They've just destroyed us.
Yeah, it's not been good. I don't want to have to play them at all. Ryan, I want to really appreciate you for being on the show tonight. It was awesome talking to you, and I hope that you'll be back on again. Before we sign off, though, where can people follow you and find that new article that you just wrote?
Yeah, no, thanks, Eric. It's been a lot of fun as well. And, I appreciate you having me on. But my Twitter handle is at Lotsryan, Lotsryan. And the new article about the Oilers power play is up at heavyhockey.com.
That is, I believe, still the most recent article. So everyone, please go over to heavyhockey.com and check that article out. And everyone give Ryan a follow on Twitter as well. Ryan, let's hope we get a win tomorrow night and that we have more good stuff to talk about going forward. And just once again, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going into the game with a Lightning fan tomorrow, so we'll have some
are
fun.
you?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm by no means a Lightning fan, but they'll always have a small place in my heart for eliminating the beating the Calgary Flames in the 2004 Stanley Cup Final. I'll always appreciate them for that.
Nice.
And as a result, not only did they beat my most hated team, but Corey Sarich won a cup with Tampa that year, and he was a former Saskatoon Blade and Saskatoon native who brought the cup back to my hometown that summer of 2004, and I got to get my picture taken with the cup. So the Lightning did me a double favor that year.
There you go. That's awesome.
But let's hope tomorrow night it's a win for the Oilers.
Absolutely. Go Oil.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Have a good night.
You as well. Thanks again, Eric.
So for Ryan Lotsberg, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.